Nothing can quite disrupt an otherwise amazing game experience more than a bad ending. Many games often take hours to complete, and the more the player feels invested in the story, the greater the letdown is when they finally get to the end, only to be exposed to a conclusion that ruins the entire narrative. So today we're looking at 10 awesome games that unfortunately delivered a subpar ending. Beware, this video contains spoilers for the following games. 10. 12 minutes. 12 minutes seems to be a deceptively simple game. A husband, the player, comes home to find his wife has prepared a romantic dessert for the two of them, announcing their first child. Amidst their celebration, a detective barges into the apartment and accuses the wife of murdering her father 8 years prior. This begins a time loop in which players must unravel the truth of what happened, navigating to the true ending of the mystery. Early in the game, the wife makes the stunning confession that she did, in fact, shoot her father. But there's more to the story than that. Though the wife did shoot her father, he didn't die. The wife's illegitimate half-brother came back a week later to finish the job. As husband and wife talk to the cop about finding the brother, the time loop ending truth is revealed. The husband is actually his wife's half-brother, though he had no knowledge of their relation or murdering their father. So basically, the protagonist is not only a cold-blooded killer, he is also having an incestuous relationship with his half-sister, and they're expecting their first child. Talk about a plot twist. 9. Halo 2. Xbox owners didn't have God of War, but Halo 2 made sure they had their own sudden cliffhanger to deal with. When Tartarus' plan to activate the Delta Halo is cut short by the Arbiter and Sergeant Johnson, it ends up putting it and several other rings on standby for remote activation from a place called the Ark. Master Chief gets in touch with Admiral Hood and announces he's going to finish this fight. Then the game cuts to black and ends. WTF? It turns out Bungie tried to do too much in too short of a time frame. With time pressing, they had to cut out a lot of stuff to get the game out on time. This included their original plan for Halo's 2 ending, where Master Chief and the Arbiter would have fought the Prophet of Truth on the Ark on Earth. Instead, Bungie had to form a new conclusion that essentially put things on ice until Halo 3 could finish the story. 8. Metal Gear Solid 5: The Phantom Pain. In true Kojima style, Metal Gear Solid 5 ends with a mind-blowing twist. It turns out you weren't actually playing as Big Boss. As the opening hospital scene hinted, your character was just a decoy, installed as leader of Mother Base to protect the real Big Boss. Somehow, thanks to plastic surgery and, nanomachines, Zero and Miller were able to transform that random medic from Ground Zeroes into someone with the face, build, memories, and skills of the world's most legendary soldier. Though Konami maintained Metal Gear Solid 5 is complete as is, there was initially a different ending considered for the game. Known as Mission 51, Collector's Edition owners of the game got a peek at what could have been in store for players. Mission 51 would have served as a proper finale to the title, seeing Venom Snake come head-to-head with Ellie, Liquid Snake, after the child clone steals Sahelanthropus. Ellie takes control of an island completely overwhelmed by parasitic infection, and it would have been up to Venom Snake to stop the boy warlord plus his newly acquired nuclear weapon. Some see it so crucial they've declared the game has no ending without Mission 51. 7. Rage. Rage was hyped as the next big thing in shooter games, with new graphics tech bringing a new, massive world to life. Instead, it was a rather linear shooter set in a very grey world. For an ordinary FPS, it was a fine gun-toting time. As a supposed groundbreaker, it fell short of the mark, especially when it comes to its story and sudden ending. The final act sees Lieutenant Rain reach the center of the Authority's HQ to activate Earth's arcs. The idea was that it would form an army large enough to overcome them. In practice, the player strafes around the console to get a scene of some buildings rising from the Earth and opening their doors to reveal the end credits. For such a big build-up, Rage's climax is a textbook example of just ending on a weak note. 6. Borderlands. If it's any consolation, at least Borderlands received plenty of sequels, spin-offs, and even a pre-sequel. The original game was a colourful breath of fresh air in an era where most games were dominated by beige, earth tones, and grim, serious heroes. However, that didn't stop its abrupt ending, leaving a foul smell, as Steel opens the vault and reveals the Destroyer, a giant tentacle monster that was shut off by the Iridians to keep the universe safe. The player has to send the giant beast back to Hell in a rather boring and repetitive boss fight. Then, once the Destroyer is finally destroyed, the Guardian Angel congratulates the player via satellite, and that's it. Claptrap becomes CL4P-TP, the interplanetary ninja assassin, to tie it into some DLC, but beyond that, there's nothing left to do but collect the leftover loot. It's not so much an ending as a stop-off point. 5. Mass Effect 3. More than a decade on, Mass Effect 3's ending has become a byword in the gaming industry for how not to close out a story. After 3 games and 5 years of fist-pumpingly great galactic space opera, Mass Effect stumbled at the finish line with an ending so abrupt it gave many players whiplash. After stumbling into the final room, Shepard is essentially given a list of bullet points and asked to tick which noble death they'd prefer. It's a staggeringly blunt conclusion to the series, knocking all the wind out of the occasion like a lead pipe to the gut, and ensuring Mass Effect ended on the flattest note imaginable. It's as if BioWare, having heard the old adage about it being the journey and not the destination, took that as a cue to spend 5 years crafting the ultimate road trip, only to ensure it ended by deliberately crashing into a tree. 4. Bioshock Infinite. Bioshock Infinite's story takes an abrupt turn halfway through. It looks to be a story about the city of Columbia in its early hours, similar to how Bioshock is much about Rapture as it is about its protagonist. However, Bioshock Infinite switches at its halfway point to focus on protagonists Booker DeWitt and Elizabeth Comstock, with Columbia taking a back seat. In effect, Bioshock Infinite has to try and tell a full story in half as much time. Booker and Elizabeth's relationship, although compelling and heartwarming, develops in many different ways within a handful of hours. This also leads Bioshock Infinite's revelations about timelines, Elizabeth's potential, and Booker's identity to feel very last minute, resulting in the game's infamously confusing ending. 3. Final Fantasy XVI. Final Fantasy XVI's ending is what happens when someone tells a writer less is more, only for the scribe to hear it as death is more. As a result, this entry in the Final Fantasy series concludes with not 1, but 3 major characters kicking the bucket in a contrived attempt at wringing emotion out of the player. Let's start with the first fatality. FF16 ends with a bunch of heroes engaging Big Baddie Ultima in a climactic clash, and the first to fall is Dion. He's the first to fall because he has fulfilled his remaining duty of guy who dies to show off how strong the big bad guy is. Next up is Joshua, the brother of protagonist Clive Rossfield. The death itself happens too quickly, and there's barely any time to dwell on the emotional fallout before the rousing final battle music kicks in and you begin the process of knocking Ultima's blocks off. And then there's Clive. The older Rossfield brother's death comes out of nowhere, as Clive suffers from ye old anime trope of having his body slowly disintegrate after using too much power. It's so abrupt that the only emotion it evokes is ironic laughter, leaving the player shaking their head in disbelief that such a ham-fisted conclusion made its way past the first draft. 3 deaths, 0 tears. 2. Sonic Frontiers. As revealed in a translated interview on Sonic City, Sonic Team were not happy with the final hours of Sonic Frontiers. That's a lot of Sonic for one sentence. Frontiers' finale was essentially a rough draft that made its way to market, as the game's troubled production meant the developers didn't have time to create a satisfying finale. This was especially clear in the ending, in which Dr. Eggman's AI daughter Sage sacrifices herself for humanity. But much like the rest of the final act, Sage's sacrifices feels like it was hastily put together. So hastily, it gets undone in the post-credits scene in which we see Eggman recreating Sage's software in his secret lab. And even that scene, along with the final act in its entirety, was rewritten with the launch of Final Horizon DLC. This free add-on delivered the intended conclusion to the game by introducing 3 new playable characters, a boss fight, and an ending that didn't go for cheap waterworks by killing off a character with all the emotion of ticking an item off a shopping list. Bonus entry, Resident Evil Village. In Village's conclusion, we find out that protagonist Ethan Winters actually died in the introduction to Resident Evil 7, and that the player has been piloting a sentient pile of mold over the past 2 games. Then, before your mind even has time to boggle over the ridiculousness of this twist, Ethan has his heart ripped out by the game's big bad. A shocking, tragic conclusion, except Ethan is still alive, and he's rescued by the mysterious Duke, except he's really dying. Finally, one disappointing final boss later, Ethan dies for good. And finally, the number 1 entry, The Witcher 3. In CD Projekt's trilogy concluder, the ending you get depends on how you interact with Ciri across several key scenes. Should you make too many wrong choices in these moments, the ending sees Ciri getting killed in the final battle. This results in the final scene of the game, and indeed the entire trilogy, being Geralt's, Ciri's father figure, clutching her pendant while being swarmed by monsters. It's a tragic ending, yes, but not a satisfying one. Firstly, Ciri's death completely undermines all the foreshadowing in the game about her following in Geralt's footsteps and becoming a Witcher herself. Secondly, the criteria to get Ciri's good ending is utterly maddening. Told Ciri to stand up for herself in an important meeting? She dies. Shared a beer with her instead of having a snowball fight? She dies. Told her to restrain her violent impulses instead of indulging in them? Guess what? She lives. No, only joking. Of course she dies. Granted, the game does allow for a couple of wrong choices, but when the wrong choice is so unclear, it's easy to accidentally kill Geralt's adopted daughter through nothing but good intentions. What other awesome games that completely fell apart at the end have you heard of? Let me know the most mind-boggling ones in the comments section below. And as always, if you enjoy gaming content, be sure to check out the videos linked on screen.